personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information you need to know now. I have a special guest on the show, Ryan Carrier. He is the executive director of For Humanity. So he works on all matter and types of things doing with AI or anything about, modernity, technology in the future. And I love your website, how you have kind of the robot hand touching the human hand. I think that's really cool. But you reached out to me a couple months ago. I've been a fan of you and your work, and I've really been amazed at all the things that you've done. But when we chatted, it was interesting because you were able to give me a background of sort of, the genesis of this project and what you had done prior. And I've been super impressed with all the work and the different work streams that you guys have going and the things that you're doing. And I actually recommend your project to many people. So many people call me up and I want to get involved in AI and, stuff about technology in the future. And I say, hey, get involved, jump in. So this is probably the first way that we're collaborating, but we're working on doing some other collaboration stuff in the future. So definitely introduce yourself. I would love for the audience to hear your backstory. I thought it was really fascinating how you kind of got to For Humanity.
Sure, and thank you for having me on and letting me share the story and appreciate all the recommendations and sending people our way. We do think of For Humanity as a great way for people to get involved in a way that fits them, right? That fits their energy and their passion, their drive and their time. Everyone who's involved at For Humanity is a volunteer, and so it is really about matching up to their ability to plug in and finding ways to take the tools and the work that we do and have it meet people where they are so that they can have their say and have their voice and really work and advance and make sure that our AIs and our autonomous systems match up to the needs of people and are driven by humanity. The backstory is fairly simple. I had a 25-year finance career. I was running my own hedge fund for the last 8 years up until about 2016. And unfortunately, I just survived that. I didn't thrive. And I was winding that hedge fund up in 2016. I had some time on my hands, but the most important points were that we used AI to manage money. So I had good familiarity with it. But more importantly, my boys, I have 2 boys, one was 4 and one was 6 years old. And I was looking at the industry, looking at Silicon Valley, move fast and break things being the kind of a Silicon Valley mantra. But what unfortunately I saw was that the breaking things was breaking people, and breaking relationships, and breaking communities. And that's not okay. I know what the mantra was meant to be. It's, to break bureaucracy, break old styles and old views and I get that, and I see the value of that. But unfortunately, the risk management culture that comes out of Silicon Valley that was built around AI, built around autonomous systems, was ineffective and remains very weak, very ineffective. And unfortunately, people are getting hurt. So I saw all of that. I saw the downside risks associated with many of these technologies. And I don't mind sharing with you, I got scared. Scared for my boys' future. Scared sufficiently that I started a nonprofit with no funding and no plan. And that should highlight for people what these risks are in terms of size and magnitude. And so For Humanity's mission is very simple. It's to examine and analyze downside risk associated with AI and autonomous systems. And where possible, engage in risk mitigations, because if we can mitigate that risk, then we can get the best possible result from these technologies for people. And that's why it's For Humanity. And that's where the idea comes from, this overly ambitious name of kind of who we work for, but we love it. It keeps us focused on who we work for, and we want to make sure that every time we are thinking about these systems, we want to think of them inclusively. Can we be for more and more and more people? And it's always difficult. It's always a challenge. We're never going to be perfect, and we're never going to be fully inclusive. But it doesn't mean we don't try, and we don't keep trying to make sure that all of these technologies are working for human beings. And so when I started this, I explored. I explored through writing. I explored through thinking. We touched on future of work, technological unemployment, rights and freedoms in the fourth industrial revolution, data. Should we own our own data? Is that part of the equation? But the thing that I settled on, which borrowed on my experience in finance, is that many of these systems are not built with trustworthiness by design. In finance, we have independent audit of financial accounting and reporting. And what most people who aren't close to that field don't recognize is that this is a system that builds an enormous amount of trust. Independent audit of financial systems creates and accounting and the audit process, 10Qs, 10Ks, financial reports, are used in such a way across the industry that entire businesses, entire industries rely upon these numbers for their whole business strategy, for their whole investment strategy, without even checking the numbers. And what that tells you is that the process that generates these numbers is extremely trusted. It's extremely robust, and it builds what we call an infrastructure of trust upon which other ideas, strategies, businesses can be built. And so we want to bring those concepts into AI, into autonomous systems, to find a way to enable this infrastructure of trust so that all of our systems are reflecting our values and our purposes and our needs. Now, we don't use debits and credits. We don't use balance sheets and cash flow statements. What we focus on are ethics, bias, privacy, trust, and cybersecurity. A holistic lens and a holistic way of looking at these systems to make sure that they are built with humans at their center. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I like the way, that's why I thought it was very important that you are on the show to be able to really explain that. And I like the fact that you have a background in finance. So I can go a lot of different ways with this. So one thing, and one thing that I've seen through history is that great wealth precedes regulation. Right. So that's what happened in the financial industry. So when you talk about all the process and procedures and regulations that are in place in finance, that's because someone made, billions of dollars and they say, hey, we need to do this differently. And that's kind of where regulation came in. So what I'm seeing in kind of the technology sphere is that we're overdue for regulation in this space. And probably, if you use financial as a lens, it would have happened by now. So what are your thoughts just about regulation in general? And, although I think we should have smart regulation to me does not mitigate the harm that can happen, right? Before you can get to a court or before you can get to a regulator. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's a great point. Let me start with that before I come to the regulation part. Most laws are built and they're put out, even GDPR, right, which is an industry leading law globally, European and UK focused, but it's still a law that sits there. And what happens is entities will engage in the ownership and collection of personal data. But then what happens is there'll be a problem. There'll be a breach or a misuse. And so it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, right? They stick their head up and they get smacked over the head with GDPR. And it's reactive. But the problem is once they smack somebody over the head who's violated GDPR, like Amazon, got fined 887 million euros for a data privacy violation of GDPR. The problem is it's already a problem. People have already been hurt. by their data being breached or leaked or misused or mishandled or whatever it was. That's reactive. What I see in finance, one of the reasons I love this concept of independent audit of AI systems, is that when you take tax law and you codify it into a set of audit rules, and you require all entities to abide by those rules and go through those audits, now what you have is you have a law, but it's been translated into auditability, and it can be enacted in advance, proactively, before people are hurt, before people are breaking the law, before people are violating and creating these harms. And so it's a proactive approach to the law. And so this is why when we think about law, we think about regulation, we want to think about enabling this sort of certification process or this advanced look that can proactively build in compliance by design. So let's talk about regulations around the world. Europeans, Singapore, UAE even a little bit, UK absolutely, are substantially ahead of the United States. In fact, the United States is probably the leader in laissez-faire regulation. Now, part of that is our political system, and I don't want to make this a political discussion, but we have issues about being able to agree on some things. The interesting thing is regulation in this space seems to be a bipartisan issue, but it's approached from two different sides, and unfortunately, we're just not there yet. Part of the problem is we don't see significant enough harm, which is remarkable given that both sides of the aisle would argue that social media has had an impact on voting, one of our key and crucial democratic institutions. But what I'd rather see, what I prefer to see, is the approach that Europeans and even the UK have taken in enacting data privacy laws. In enacting, in the UK, for those who don't know, there's a law called the Children's Code, was formerly known as the Age Appropriate Design Code, and it governs the interaction between children, their data, and their online world and life. And the net result is that it's actually an extremely thoughtful approach to ensure that when children engage and start putting their data out, they're learning what that means. They're aware of the way they're interacting. They're aware of the way that data is being taken and used and how it's being used, because the law demands it. Interestingly, three US politicians, Trahan and Castor from the House, and then Senator Ed Markey, put out a call to 12 of the US leading game designers to abide by the Children's Code, suggesting that this age-appropriate design code, the Children's Code, should be followed in how they design games. And I do agree that it is a gold standard law that is likely to be adopted in various forms in jurisdictions all around the world. It really is a very nice and valuable law. So I see regulation coming in the United States. I see it piecemeal. I see it coming through individual sectors. I see it coming through regulators themselves, particularly the departments, through regulatory guidance. I see it in finance, building upon SR 11.7 and model risk management. I see it coming out of the EEOC. Both Charlotte Burrows and Keith Sonderling have called for regulation in the HR and hiring space. I see it coming out of the FTC. Lena Khan is very much in favor, and Rebecca Slaughter as well, both pushing for better governance of privacy laws. One of the problems that we face is that right now the slowness of Washington is being, the ball is being picked up by states. And that makes it very hard for companies to comply, because they're complying with individual state mandates, and even knowing what all the laws are in this marketplace can be difficult at the state level. And so there really is a need at the federal level to settle on some of these issues. And then finally, on top of all that, you have the new EU Artificial Intelligence Act proposed in April, still being discussed. It is not enacted in Europe as of yet, likely to be. And then the question is how are these high risk AI is going to be managed? And more importantly, how will they meet the demands of what are known as conformity assessments, or the work that we're trying to do, which is these certification schemes so that they can meet and prove compliance with the law. And that's going to be the kind of the next 12 to 18 months, is seeing how that plays out. Did that answer your question, Demi?
Yes, that was great. Thank you. As you were talking, I'm scribbling notes. It reminds me, so what's happening in the US right now reminds me of the digital divide and why that's a problem here. Problem everywhere, definitely here, because many of our laws, almost all of them around privacy, are, either based by a sector, right? Or what I like to say is a consumer law versus a human law. So, the example I like to give to people is like, if you're a resident of the state of California, you walk to a grocery store, they have to abide by, CCPA and CPRA. And you walk across the street to a church and they don't, right? Because they're not for profit. So you're the same person, you're the same human, but because you're not kind of consuming in that way, those laws don't apply to you. So for me, if you're not someone who's able to consume things, then you can't really exercise your privacy right in the US. And that is the gap that concerns me a lot.
Well, and I would add to that we have a wide array of appetite for privacy. Even amongst my peers and my friends here in town, I have some who are like, privacy, who cares? Literally, privacy, who cares? I'll tell Alexa everything. And then, through For Humanity, through the work we do, I've got, privacy, people who are super focused on their privacy, very careful about where they place data, using pseudonymization of their own. Even when it's not available to them, they'll engage in it from the outset. And so that spectrum of appetite for privacy is our biggest problem, because the ones who are super focused on it are not sufficient in the whole spectrum of demand. And that is one of the key reasons that we don't have a focus on this now. Another is that it's actually not a constitutional right, which is, look, I want to be very clear. There's 250 years of jurisprudence around this, which has built a right to privacy, as it should have been. But it is not an explicit right. It's built out of the Fourth Amendment, which is not about privacy, certainly not about data. And so this is why you hear talk about sort of a second Bill of Rights, possibly, and one of those areas of focus is this idea of privacy. But until your data has value, I don't necessarily see a sufficient number of people to drive this. Now, it might come because the data that's out there turns into all of these breaches, and these breaches are pretty problematic and expensive, by the way, very expensive for the entities that get breached. And so we could have kind of an institutional drive that brings people with it, which that's fine with me, doesn't trouble me, but it doesn't change the fact that we still need to educate what I would call the retail population on the value of data privacy. So I would add that on top of your remarks.
That's a great way to look at it. Yeah. It definitely concerns me, especially because the exponential growth of data capture, artificial intelligence, the metaverse, we can jump into that. We're entering a situation, probably there already in some instances, where data is being generated and people don't know, first of all, don't know all the data is being collected around them, have no agency to be able to do anything with it or have any control. But then, going back to the digital divide thing, it's like, okay, let's say if you don't have a cell phone, so a smartphone. So the last statistic I saw was that the less than 50% of people in the world have smartphones. So, you probably can't even participate in the metaverse if you don't have a smartphone. Like that's like one of the key things. So you're going to have a population that data is going to be collected about them that they may not even be able to interact with at all.
Yeah, and whether we talk about kind of a US centric perspective where that statistic of smartphones doesn't apply nearly as much, right? It's a much higher number versus a developing world where data isn't even an item, right? It's not even a thing yet until there's a form and way to collect that data. But it doesn't change the fact that there are what I would call global north entities who are going into the global south, which tends to be, it's one way to describe sort of a developed world versus a developing world. I see extractions, not dissimilar to colonialism. Now, I don't like the term colonialism for what's happening, but it's a pejorative that we should be aware of and work to avoid. Whether we are the global north bringing it not to be colonial, and whether we're from a For Humanity perspective, for example, we want to be in those markets helping to educate people and helping them to avoid that colonization and having their data extracted and sucked out without any value, and in fact with likely a detrimental delivery of service and information takeover. We saw this in a couple of places in the Middle East where mom and pop stores, kind of a very traditional thing, right, in the US, where mom and pop stores go away because the big box retailer comes in. Well, we saw this in information. Local information, the local interpretation of information was going away because the big entities were coming in and saying, we'll scrape all the information, we'll scrape all the data that we need to, and we'll give it right back to you. And now it's the global north telling the story of the global south. And that's the problem. That's a perspective problem. It's an ethical problem. And it's just one of those sort of nightmares of you use the term digital divide, and I'll use that as well, of where a digital divide can create huge problems of just even information. And we have big information problems in our society today.
Yeah. Let's talk about the metaverse. That's like the hot topic now.
Do we have to use the term metaverse? Can we use? I hate giving Facebook that kind of credit.
Well, they were the first one to try to claim it and try to make it more widespread in terms of the talk about it. So they want to be in the conversation about metaverse. But metaverse really is about devices, right? They have software and sensors that are collecting data. The metaverse is about fusion. So technologies that can make sense of that data once it's collected in real time or near real time, and then what happens with that data after. So obviously there's money to be made all in that chain, but Facebook isn't going to be the focus of the metaverse. It's going to be all these other companies that you've never heard of. Your coffee pot will be talking to your Roomba vacuum cleaner very soon. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, for sure. So I have a whole mess of concerns, not the least of which starts with just the human experience in a virtual world. We are already having significant difficulties being human to each other. Now, that doesn't mean that a metaverse can't actually help overcome some of these issues, right? But I do see technology has created a genuine problem where people believe that they are self-sufficient, and it's a mistake. Because I can order anything, I can get anything by myself, I have this belief that I could survive on my own. And that's a different existence than the way things were 100 years ago. And let me give you an example. 100 years ago, I did not have enough access to enough things to actually survive. So I had to go into town and I had to get lumber from the lumber yard, right? Or I had to go to the general store to get anything to survive. Here's the thing. When I interacted with those people, let's say I didn't get along with them. Let's say I had a problem. Let's say we had a fight. Okay. You know what I had to do once I had that fight with the guy who ran the lumber yard? I had to fix it. I had to interact with that person to live. And you know what that caused me to do? It caused me to be human, to look at their side. It brings empathy, it brings sympathy, it brings understanding, it brings dialogue, and we find ways to get past our anger, our hurt, our problem. You know what we do now? We say the worst things to people because we don't think we're ever going to meet them, and we certainly don't need them. And the net result is we create all of these divides at a very human and personal level because there's this belief of self-sufficiency. And by the way, it's an illusion. You lose your electricity, you have no money. You know, let's say electricity went down for a substantial period of time. Now you have no money, you have no access, you have no food. Your ability, look at electric cars, your ability to get anywhere might be substantially hindered. Your ability to be self-sufficient has not improved. It's been made easy. It's been made illusionary. It's been made systematized, but now you're a part of the system. And then when you translate that into a metaverse, into an online space, what if these things are restricted? What if you can only get access? You know, I think of a Ready Player One world. People were building around Columbus because it was the center of the internet at the time, right? In that sort of an imaginary world. Well, what if everybody's clustering around certain nodes where internet is being projected out or where energy can be extracted? I look at Bitcoin and I look at cryptocurrencies racing into Texas because the deregulated version of the electricity markets, they can get more access so that they can mine more crypto. I don't know. I have concerns, as you can tell, but they center around the human. And they center around the fact that most of these technologies are not being built to serve the human experience, human well-being. They're built to serve making money. They're built to serve taking advantage, I think, of a lot of our humanity.
Yeah. And then, you know, the thing that concerns me most about technology and technology advancements is that the harm can be so great and so detrimental that there is no adequate legal redress. So I think just looking at regulation isn't enough. It has to be, like you said, mitigated in a way to try to prevent the harm. But we all know, right, from history, that there's a lot of money to be made after the fact. So there's a lot of money to be made in reaction. As a matter of fact, you know, I was talking to someone the other day, and I just realized, there are people who use AI, the term AI, to talk about so many broad things that really aren't AI, right? But the fact that you could actually have something, a technology that's trying to predict the future by looking at the past, right? Which to me, I don't think that's intelligent, in my opinion, right? But the future is not going to be like the past. So that is a huge problem if organizations are trying to rely on things, especially around preventing the harm around individuals. So trying to pretend that somehow the future is going to be like the past is a problem. It's incorrect.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think of two different ways, and let me make sure if I can remember what I'm thinking here, which is number one, I actually think what we advocate for through our process of looking at ethics, bias, privacy, trust, and cybersecurity leads to more sustainable profitability over time for companies. So I think there are those out there who could strip and just extract every bit that they can from people today. But if they do it in an abusive way, that profitability will not be sustainable over time. So I actually think that those kind of entities that can engage in responsible and value-driven service, combined with treating humans with human dignity and respect and embedding them in the process, will result in better profitability that's more sustainable over time. So that's number one. I actually think that is centric to the human experience, and these humans are needed to generate this profitability, to generate consumer demand, and so on. The other place that I see being crucial and critical is identifying risks in advance and mitigating them. And one of the key elements of how we engage in our work is what we call diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback. Now, what is required in diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback is the idea that any system is built by a small team. Usually it's going to be a team that is not as diverse as it should be. And they will come with a perspective. And one of the things I like to say about diversity is you can have a full team of black, let's say black and brown men and women, right? So already it's a good start, right? But if they all went to MIT, do we really have diversity? Do we have diversity of thought? Do we have diversity of lived experience? Do we have diversity of wealth? Do we have diversity of background? These elements of diversity are just as important as what we would call protected category diversity of race or color or age and so on. So we want to make sure that when we're thinking about diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback, that we're thinking about the big word of diversity. And in addition to that, how can we enable those diverse inputs to creatively identify risk and harms? Because if they can creatively identify risk and harms, then we have a chance in advance of those harms happening, of mitigating those risks and planning for and managing those risks. I'll give you an example. It's an unfortunate example. But the way that I think of diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback is this. How many people had to be in the room at TSA, TSA governing how we travel, right? Governing how we enter and exit airports, as an example. How many people had to be in the room in 1998 before someone might have said, you know what could happen? Terrorists could learn how to fly planes. They could actually go through security, hijack a plane, and drive it into a building. The answer is more than were in TSA at that time, right? But if we had more people in the room with more creative backgrounds, thinking creatively about how risks might manifest, then could we have thought about that risk and taken those steps in advance and decided if it was a meaningful risk that we wanted to manage it. Now, it's not a perfect process because you could even hear those words at TSA and be like, it's not going to happen. And then it still happens, right? So we're not talking about perfect risk mitigation. But what we want to do is we want to let people think in lots of different ways about how negative things can happen. So that when a Facebook goes from 200 people at Harvard to 2 billion users, somewhere along the way, someone might say something like, you know what? We now have sufficient enough influence that people might be able to use our system to influence democratic institutions like voting. And is there something we can do about it in advance? So those are the two kind of key things that I think about at sort of the corporate level, at the risk management level of how these systems are being implemented and ways that we can work to imagine and identify these risks and potential harms and adverse impact, disparate impact in advance to try to get the best possible result, again, for humanity.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when I think about that, I think about what's happening in cyber right now. So we're seeing all these cyber breaches, and I mean, it's just ridiculous. And they're only just getting bigger and, more sophisticated or not, right? We're seeing companies go down in flames for just basic hygiene, cyber hygiene. But part of that problem, and this sort of fuels cyber crime, is that companies think it can't be them. Like, we're great. Like, it's not going to happen. It happened to Jim down the street, but it's not going to happen to me. And so I see parallels there in privacy and, in AI, where people like, let's say I live in for example, someone says, I'm sure Warren Buffett is not having privacy problems, right? He probably lives in, the most private spaces and whatever, but if you're not Warren Buffett, you think about these types of things, right? So the fact that it's out of sight, is not a problem for some people doesn't mean that it doesn't impact other people. And I think that's where we kind of trip over ourselves, where people want to take advantage of that. They're like, okay, well, this person's unsuspecting that I'm gonna like take their information or use it in some harmful way. So I'm gonna only show them like the cool stuff, and I'm not gonna, like I like to say, the way that products are made or whatever. It's like, let me satisfy your need for instant gratification, and then delay the harm, down the road. Sometimes we don't have to think about that. So it's like, eat the cotton candies today and your teeth are going to fall out in 6 months.
Right. Well, when I think of cybersecurity, I get, is frustrated the right word? Maybe frustrated is the right word, that we don't have baseline norms of operation, right, for all entities, and that we aren't actually meeting a need for creating cost-effective and efficient applications of cybersecurity that create foundational levels. The Pentagon is a place that gets attacked very regularly, and therefore they're in the business of considering what those risks are, how to protect their data, right? It's an active strategy. It's an active part of everything that they do at all levels, whether they're dealing with a human resources type of software, all the way up to, weaponry, right? But Target didn't think of that, and they had a 4 million, data consumer breach, right? Experian didn't think of that, and they get a huge breach, right? So what needs to happen in terms of consequences to cause entities to take it seriously and to at least establish a baseline? And the funny thing is most of these breaches occur for the simplest of reasons, right? I didn't update my Windows update, and therefore I was in there. Or worse, it's human in the loop kind of breaches where passwords are being shared and usernames are being shared. And so some of these are actually relatively simple, relatively inexpensive fixes. And yet there's not a robust environment for ensuring that it happens. And you know what insurance means? Not insurance, not insurance, ensuring, and thus assuring all of these roles. Here's the key thing about what we do with independent audit. You might be a great person, Debbie, and you might go through a process that makes sure that you've done the right thing. The human nature of it is that even if you're a good person, at some point in time, you're probably going to be like, I'll take care of it tomorrow, or I got other priorities right now. The difference is, if you know that I'm coming to check that you've gone through your checklist, I'm coming to see, have you done the things that you said you're going to do? You know what human nature is? You do it. That is the very nature of governance, oversight, and accountability through third-party audits. When there's a whole set of rules in place, and everybody knows that those rules are there, and they know that a third-party auditor is coming to see if those rules and those criteria have been followed, you know what the remarkable thing about humans is? We do those things. And that's the great advantage of the independent audit system, to build the kind of governance, oversight, and accountability that we need to shore up a lot of these risks and make sure that we can mitigate them in the best possible way. That makes sense?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. I would love to talk to you about third-party risk. So I see in the very near future, within the next year, third-party risk is going to increase exponentially for a couple reasons. One is there's all these regulations now in the US. We have state level regulations that are coming into full effect in 2023 about that have stipulations in it about third party risk and third party data sharing. We already see it in things like GDPR and other laws. So this seems to be a trend that's happening. And as we know, the states can pass these laws faster than other people, right? And then sort of back to the metaverse, okay, and back to a situation where there's more types of data being collected about individuals, and it's more third parties now, right? And
Yes.
more data sharing with third parties. I feel like this is going to be like a tsunami of like third party risk is going to converge probably within the next year or so. So I like the fact that you're thinking about third party risk and audits. But what is your thought about sort of this groundswell of things that will be happening around third party risk?
So I'm going to add a term that you didn't use into this third-party risk, which is biometric data, especially when we talk in an AR, VR, metaverse kind of world. The amount of biometric data that each of us will be giving off, captured by these third parties, will be astronomical. I can change my name. I can change my password. I cannot change my DNA. I cannot easily change my retina. I cannot easily change the shape of my face or my fingerprints. When this biometric data is out there in a substantial way, identity theft ramps up exponentially. The cost, difficulty to overcome, and we don't even need to go into the science fiction of if my genetic data is out there, cloning. I refer to something called that technology is an autocracy. Let me explain what that means. The entire world can agree on a plan. The entire world, which think of how many times the world agrees on something, right? It's very rare. Okay. The entire world agreed not to gene edit humans. And yet 3 scientists in China, one at Rice University, got together, gene edited a baby, and it turned out to be 2 babies and brought them to full term, even though the whole world said you shouldn't do that. And that is when I say technology is an autocracy, that is what I mean. Any individual can do what they want with technology, even if it's not the right thing to do, and even if the entire world agrees that they shouldn't do it. The net result of that is crazy talk, like taking your DNA. You've just done 23andMe, right? You've just put out there, 23andMe owns your genetic code when you give it to them, which is nuts, by the way. And now they get hacked or breached. And now that data is out there. What could the wrong person do with that biometric data? These are the kinds of things that 5 years ago caused me to start For Humanity and think about this. And unfortunately, we haven't made a lot of progress. And we have a long way to go. We are very focused on biometric data, taking it to a whole other level, lockbox style, but also getting back to that point about our data. All these people who are doing things like giving out their genetic code just to get an interesting and cute little report back and paying for the service. It's like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? These are some of the most valuable things that we own. And the risk is not well understood. And most importantly, the risk will change over time as more and more of this data is out there. And unfortunately, there are bad people who engage in malfeasance and other problematic, let's call them criminal, for lack of a better word, ways of causing harm and benefiting themselves. And unfortunately, this is the next wave. And I don't know, we can't move fast enough. We're trying, but I don't know. There's not a lot of education around the risks around biometric data currently. Something you certainly can help with, and something I know you do work on and care about. So any way that we can help you magnify that voice, we are all for it, because I'm nervous, and a lot of people at For Humanity are nervous about biometric data, third parties, where it goes, how it's protected, and so on.
I'm deeply concerned about that. So that's definitely something we can collaborate on. Let me ask you, I ask everyone, if it was the world according to Ryan, and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy in anywhere in the world, anything, whether it's technology, law, human behavior, anything?
I would, just following up on this, I would have a lot. So my list would be long, but let's focus on where I would just was. And that would be a high degree of safety and security mandated around biometric data in a manner that is always consensually driven around a great amount of education about the risks and consequences to the use or distribution or giving or consensual giving, or whatever it is around this data at even a retail level, just raising the awareness of how risky this data may be. And then those who have it, those who get it through whatever means, whether it's consensual, whether it's explicit and informed consent, or whether it's even people who are out there scraping this data, which I just despise, no permission, no control, no governance over what they scrape, what they take, what they do with it, that all of this would have to be in as big and as sound and as firm and as strong and as protected a lockbox as we possibly could put it in. That would be, I'd feel like a victory, at least, if we could get to that place with biometric data.
Yeah, I share your concerns in that regard, for sure. Well, this has been really great to chat with you today. This is a fantastic episode. Why don't you let folks know how they can contact you and get involved in For Humanity?
Sure. So we have a website. It's https://forhumanity.center. And there people can learn about what we do. They can actually register. And registering on our website means something very simple. It's you're providing your email address and you're agreeing to our code of conduct. But once you do that, we actually do personal onboarding with me, where I walk people through what it is we do and how we do it. And we've grown over the last 18 months from just me to now nearly 650 people from 48 countries around the world, all pouring in on the work that we're doing. And so if you want to be involved, you are welcome to join and to register. And we can sort of bring you in and figure out what your passions and your energies and your dreams and your goals are. We have a lot of tools that we want to give to people to empower them to succeed in this space. So registering on the website is the easiest way, and also connect with me on LinkedIn, Ryan Carrier and For Humanity, and you'll find me pretty easily. And we can take the conversation from there.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to us being able to collaborate together and have more chats about things that we can do, for sure. So I'm really excited about the things that you're doing, and I have friends as well. I've mentioned my buddy Rohan Light from New Zealand, who's part of the For Humanity effort as well. So I think, I love what you're doing, and I love to see what we can do together.
That sounds great. I look forward to it as well.
Well, thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.